Hello everyone! So today we are on to the third and final video about how I made this holiday inspired dress. In this one I'll be showing you how I made and attached the skirt, so now let's get started. I'm starting by laying out my remaining striped fabric and trimming the edges so they are straight. I'm working with 4 yards of fabric that is 61 inches wide, in case you were wondering. Then I'm marking a line 5 inches away from the edge of the fabric all the way along. And cutting the material at this line so my fabric is 56 inches long. Then I was distracted by this little stinker who was being really cute, and it was too cute for me to completely remove it from this video, so I'm sorry for the interruption. I turned the bottom edge of the skirt hem inward by 1/2 inch and sewed it down with basting stitches, which in this case were large running stitches. 1/2 inch is pretty easy to estimate, but you might want to measure and use pins if you're unsure. I was feeling fairly confident this day, so I skipped those steps. Using chalk and a ruler, I marked a line 3 inches away from the edge of the fabric. Then I folded the hem up so it touched this line and pinned it in place. I secured the hem with a cross stitch all the way along. I really like this stitch. It's almost invisible from the front side of the fabric, and it's a lot of fun to do, but it is a little bit more time consuming and uses more thread than other hemming stitches, so make sure to keep that in mind. It's a difficult stitch to explain, but I'll leave a link to a diagram of it in the description in case you're curious about how it's done. Now cut out 2 rectangles of cotton. These will be used almost like a facing and placed at the back of the skirt. This way the closures for the skirt can be mounted to the cotton, and the stitching that attaches them won't be visible from the outside of the skirt. Turn 3 of the panel's edges over by 1/2 inch and sew them down. Then sew the unfinished edge onto the back of the skirt panel with the right sides facing each other and a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Turn the facing inward so it's against the wrong side of the fabric, then pin it down. Now it's time to sew it in place. I'm doing this with large whip stitches and only grabbing a few threads from the front side of the fabric so the stitching isn't super visible. Now gather the top edge of the skirt down so it matches the width of the bodice you made. I'm doing this with running stitches that are pulled tightly as I go so they gather the fabric, but you can do it however you like. Now sew on the skirt closures. I'm using hooks and bars. I believe these are size 2 and I'm placing them between 2 inches and 1.5 inches apart. The spacing doesn't matter too much, but make sure the hooks and bars line up. Otherwise the back of the skirt will look puckered instead of flat. Now sew up the back seam of the skirt. I'm sewing mine with the French seam, so it's stitched with the wrong sides facing each other, then trimmed, then sewn with the right sides facing each other. I'm leaving the top portion with the hooks open, but tapering the stitching from that point into a regular 1/2 inch seam allowance, so it doesn't look too abrupt or odd from the outside of the skirt. Now the skirt gets pinned onto the bodice. And I actually went ahead and used basting stitches across this point as well, since I didn't think the pins were holding the skirt to the bodice in the exact way I wanted. Then the skirt gets sewn on. I did this from the back side of the skirt so the gathers were visible as I sewed. I do not recommend this when sewing seams with dense gathers because it flattens the gathers slightly and can make them look lumpy and uneven. I forgot about that little problem, so I sewed it this way, and I really regret it because my gathers look lumpy and awful, and unfortunately my fabric is too delicate for me to rip them out and redo them. Anyway, once that was done, I pinned a piece of bright red ribbon across the waist of the bodice. I sewed this on with small running stitches and thread in a matching color. You might be able to tell that I'm struggling with this step, and that's because this ribbon was backed with some weird film that made it really thick and difficult to sew through. It was like sewing through cardboard and not fun. I cut my leftover ribbon into 3 even lengths. Then sewed them together to create a single piece of ribbon that is much wider. Sew the 2 ends together so you have a circle of ribbon. Press down in the center of the ribbon to create 2 loops. Then sew across this point. You can even gather the ribbon slightly if you want. This makes it easier to place the center bit of the bow. Trim a scrap of ribbon down to the right length and wrap it around the center of the bow. Then sew the 2 ends together so it stays in place. Sew a snap onto the waist of the bodice a few inches away from the center back. This will attach one side of the bow to the bodice. If both sides of the bow were sewn on, there would be no way of getting into the dress, and this lets you avoid that problem. Then sew a snap onto the back of the bow. And sew the side of the bow that doesn't have a snap on it to the other side of the bodice. Once snapped in place, the center of the bow should line up with the center back of the bodice. And that's it! The dress is complete. I love how this turned out. I think it's pretty cute from every angle, but I especially love the bows and the bodice detailing. I will have more photos and information about this project linked below if you're interested, as well as links to last year's Christmassy costume. I really hope you've enjoyed this video and this series, and I really appreciate you watching. And I hope that you have a lovely holiday if you celebrate any of them, or at least enjoy the time off school or work. I think that's all for now, but I will see you guys next time. Thanks again for watching.